The year was 1943. The war in the skies over Europe had reached a fever pitch. What began as swift German domination, the glory days of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf Fw-190, was now slowly tilting against the Luftwaffe. Across the English Channel, the Royal Air Force and the newly arrived United States Army Air Forces were growing stronger every week. Thousands of aircraft were rolling out of American factories, while Germany struggled to replace each fallen pilot, each lost machine. By the time 1944 approached, the daylight skies over Europe were no longer German. They were contested, and then they became allied. And at the heart of this turning point stood a strange, bulky, and brutally powerful machine, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. At first sight, the P-47 was a paradox, a heavy, almost ungainly brute of a fighter, vastly larger than anything the Luftwaffe fielded. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine gave it a sound unlike any other, a deep metallic roar that echoed through the clouds. German pilots who first encountered it mistook it for a bomber. But once they learned its name, Thunderbolt, they realized it was something entirely different. It climbed with authority, dove like a thunderstone from the heavens, and soaked up damage that would tear a Bf-109 to pieces. To the Luftwaffe, it was a new kind of enemy, an aircraft that seemed to ignore the rules of dogfighting physics. And that was precisely what drew the attention of Werner Lerche. Lerche was not an ordinary Luftwaffe pilot. He was one of the few men entrusted with testing captured enemy aircraft, a man whose job was to understand the machines of the Allies better than their own creators. Calm, analytical, and disciplined, Lerche belonged to the Erprobungsstelle Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's secret test center located north of Berlin. Rechlin was the heart of German flight testing, a place where technology met espionage, where British Spitfires, American Mustangs, and Soviet Yaks stood side by side with FW-19s and ME-262s. When word reached Rechlin that a captured P-47 had been recovered, nearly intact, from a forced landing in France, Lerche was assigned to examine it. The order was clear. Evaluate the Thunderbolt's strengths, identify its weaknesses, and discover how the Luftwaffe could defeat it. The captured aircraft was shipped to Germany in crates, reassembled under tight security, and painted with Balkenkreuze, the black crosses of the Luftwaffe. For the first time, the Germans would fly the Thunderbolt not as an enemy target, but as a machine to be understood. But no one could have predicted what Lerche would find once he took the controls. As he climbed into the cockpit, he was struck by the sheer size of it. Compared to the compact confines of a Bf-109, the Thunderbolt felt like a flying fortress in miniature. Thick armor plates, heavy control surfaces, and an enormous instrument panel that seemed to stretch endlessly. The canopy offered wide, clear visibility, and beneath the pilot's seat lay one of the most complex turbo-supercharged power systems ever built for a fighter. The R2800 engine, coupled with its advanced turbocharger system, allowed the Thunderbolt to maintain power even at altitudes that choked German aircraft. In high-altitude combat, where bombers flew and where the Luftwaffe now fought for its survival, that mattered more than anything. Lerche's job was to quantify that, to turn the raw sensation of flight into technical understanding. He would take off from Rechlin, climb through the cold northern air, and document every vibration, every roll response, every stall characteristic. At first, the Luftwaffe engineers expected to find flaws. They were sure this American machine would be sluggish, too heavy, unable to match the agility of a German fighter. But as Lerche's reports came in, the mood in the hangars began to change. The Thunderbolt was not slow. It was not weak, and in certain conditions, it was nearly untouchable. It could dive faster than any Luftwaffe fighter, its rugged airframe allowing it to exceed speeds that would have destroyed a Bf-109 or FW-190. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns created a storm of lead that shredded anything caught in front of them, and its ability to sustain damage, to lose cylinders, hydraulics, even sections of the wing, and still return home, left Lerche astonished. This was no longer a simple test flight. It was an encounter with a machine that embodied the full industrial might of the United States, a weapon of war built not for elegance, but for endurance, for numbers, for domination. And for the Luftwaffe, already exhausted by years of attrition, this realization was chilling. The P-47 was not just an aircraft. It was a symbol of an enemy whose factories never slept, whose pilots arrived faster than they could be replaced, whose sky armor now stretched from Normandy to Berlin. In the months that followed, Lerche would document every aspect of the Thunderbolt's performance. His findings would circulate through Luftwaffe command, through intelligence briefings, through the desperate meetings of the Reich's Aviation Ministry. And with each page, one truth became harder to ignore. The Luftwaffe's time was running out. The morning fog hung over Rechlin like a thin veil of ash when Werner Lerche prepared for the first test flight of the captured P-47. The mechanics had worked for weeks restoring the aircraft. Its American insignia had been replaced by the stark black and white Balkenkreuz, and its serial numbers carefully documented. Yet even under German markings, it looked foreign, too large, too muscular, too American. As Lerche approached the Thunderbolt, he paused for a long moment. To most Luftwaffe pilots, this was simply an enemy machine, a target to destroy. To Lerche, it was a problem to be understood, an equation written in aluminum and steel. His task was not to hate it, but to learn from it. He climbed into the cockpit, noting the difference immediately. Everything about the P-47 felt oversized. The thick armor behind the seat, the robust control stick, the heavy canopy frames. Even the seatbelt straps were broader, made for pilots who flew through storms of flak over France and the Ruhr. The ground crew cleared the area. Lerche checked the gauges, oil pressure, manifold temperature, turbocharger control. Then, with a deep rumble, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 came to life. The sound was nothing like the high-pitched whine of a Daimler-Benz DB605. It was a bass thunder, a raw industrial roar that shook the hangars. The test notes would later record, engine power excellent, throttle response heavy but consistent. Aircraft vibrates under full boost, but stability remains satisfactory. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Lerche realized the first truth of the Thunderbolt. It was no fragile fighter. It demanded strength. The stick was firm, the rudder sluggish. But as the aircraft lifted from the ground, the controls steadied, the heavy mass transforming into a steady, confident glide. Climbing through 5,000 meters, Lerche tested the supercharger. Most Luftwaffe aircraft lost power rapidly above 7,000 meters, but the P-47 kept climbing with surprising ease. The turbocharger hissed like a living creature beneath the fuselage, forcing oxygen into the cylinders with relentless efficiency. At 9,000 meters, the German instruments began to frost. The air was thin and bitterly cold, yet the Thunderbolt still responded smoothly. Lerche wrote later, "At high altitude, engine maintains full pressure. Rate of climb superior to Bf-109. G above 8,000 meters. Remarkable engineering." It was a revelation. For years, the Luftwaffe had dominated the mid-altitudes of combat, the sweet spot where their engines performed best. But the American bombers flew higher, and now, with aircraft like the P-47, their escorts could meet the Germans at those heights. Over the next weeks, Lerche performed dozens of tests. He examined stall behavior, dive acceleration, roll rate, and fuel consumption. Each day ended with long evenings of reports filled with precise figures and personal impressions. He found that in a dive, the Thunderbolt was almost invincible. Once the nose dropped, gravity became its ally. Lerche described how the aircraft could exceed 500 miles per hour without losing control, a speed that would send the wings of a Messerschmitt fluttering to destruction. The German engineers were stunned. The reason lay in the P-47's design. Its thick, elliptical wings and massive fuselage acted like armor against the air itself. In a power dive, the Thunderbolt became a bullet, and when it leveled out, it could use that speed to climb back with astonishing momentum. But not everything impressed Lerche. The turning radius was poor, and in tight dogfights, the German fighters would still outmaneuver it. The controls were heavy, demanding physical strength. The large radial engine blocked part of the forward view, and its weight made the aircraft slow to accelerate in level flight. Still, these disadvantages were overshadowed by what the Germans feared most: survivability. During simulated gunfire tests, Lerche observed how the armor plates protected the pilot from almost every angle. The fuel tanks were self-sealing, and even the control cables were duplicated to ensure flight after damage. In comparison, the Luftwaffe's own fighters were built for agility, not endurance. One burst from the Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber Browning guns could turn a Bf-109 into debris in a fraction of a second, while the German cannons, though deadlier per shot, often jammed under stress. By mid-1944, Lerche had completed more than 20 hours of testing. His final report circulated through the Luftwaffe High Command, reaching as far as General Ernst Udet's successors at the RLM. The conclusion was clear and grim. The P-47 is not a dogfighter in the traditional sense. It is an energy fighter, built to dive, strike, and climb away. Its pilot need not turn. He controls the battle through altitude and speed. Its robustness and high-altitude performance make it one of the most formidable opponents we have encountered. The findings caused quiet unease among German engineers. They had relied on speed and precision, on the craftsmanship of individual machines. The Americans relied on scale, power, and resilience. The contrast was not only technical, it was philosophical. Lerche, in later interviews after the war, reflected on that moment. He admitted that testing the P-47 made him realize the war's outcome was already decided, not by tactics alone, but by industry. Germany was designing elegant weapons. America was forging unstoppable ones. At Rechlin, Lerche also compared the Thunderbolt to the FW-19-0A-8, one of the Luftwaffe's most advanced radial engine fighters. In pure speed, the two were close. But in climb rate above 8,000 meters, the American plane pulled ahead. In dive recovery, there was no contest. The FW-190 buffeted and strained, while the P-47 cut through the air like a meteor. As he recorded one final dive test, Lerche reached speeds that terrified even him. The control stick stiffened, the altimeter spun wildly, and the airframe groaned, but the aircraft held. When he pulled out of the dive and leveled at low altitude, the Thunderbolt surged forward with the grace of a predator. He landed safely, trembling slightly from the strain, and turned off the engine. The massive propeller slowed to a halt, and for a moment the airfield fell silent. Only then did he realize what the test had proven. The P-47 was not just durable, it was forgiving. It allowed its pilot to make mistakes and survive them. In the brutal arithmetic of war, that meant everything. Back in Berlin, officials debated what this meant for German strategy. Some urged new designs to counter it. Others said it was too late. The Reich's factories were already burning under Allied bombs. Many of them dropped by P-47s, escorting flying fortresses through the flak-filled skies. Hans Werner Lerche continued his duties, testing more captured aircraft until the end of the war, a silent witness to the technological duel that defined the conflict. But none impressed him more than that heavy, thunderous American fighter that had once been the enemy. By late 1944, the war in Europe had reached a critical turning point. The Luftwaffe, once feared across the continent, was now stretched thin. Experienced pilots were scarce, fuel was rationed, and aircraft production could not keep pace with attrition. Into this environment, Lerche's reports on the P-47 Thunderbolt arrived like a quiet alarm bell. The documents were meticulous. They detailed climb rates, dive capabilities, firepower effectiveness, armor resilience, and handling characteristics. They compared the Thunderbolt to the Luftwaffe's mainstays, the Bf-109G and the FW-190A. The conclusions were unavoidable. In the hands of a competent pilot, the P-47 could dominate almost any engagement at high altitude and withstand damage that would destroy a German fighter. Commanders debated what could be done. Some engineers proposed modifications to German aircraft, heavier armor, turbocharged engines, better dive recovery mechanisms. Yet the war's momentum was against them. Factories had been destroyed in Allied bombing raids, supply chains were collapsing, and the Allies' industrial machine continued producing P-47s in staggering numbers. Lerche's findings also shaped Luftwaffe tactics. Intercept units were advised to avoid head-on dives against Thunderbolts and instead attempt attacks at lower altitudes or in coordinated groups, but these strategies were often impractical. By this stage of the war, German pilots were inexperienced, numerical superiority was lost, and the skies were dominated by the relentless presence of American fighters. The P-47, once an enemy unknown, had become a benchmark. Its combination of durability, firepower, and high-altitude performance forced German pilots and engineers to rethink the limits of fighter design. Even when measured against the FW-190D9 or late-model Bf-109K, the Thunderbolt remained a formidable opponent, a flying testament to the power of mass-produced industrially robust engineering. For Hans Werner Lerche personally, the experience left a lasting impression. In interviews decades later, he reflected on the paradox of testing enemy aircraft. The admiration for the machine itself was inseparable from the grim awareness of what it represented. An adversary whose industrial and technical resources were inexhaustible. He would describe the Thunderbolt as a flying fortress in fighter guise, an aircraft that could take punishment, deliver it back, and return home intact, again and again. The lessons from Lerche's test did not change the outcome of the war, but they provide a unique lens through which to view it. The P-47's success demonstrated that technology, production capacity, and design philosophy could outweigh the tactical ingenuity of even the most skilled air force. Germany had produced remarkable aircraft, elegant and precise, but the Allies had produced machines that were relentless, forgiving, and scalable. The legacy of these tests continues today in military aviation studies. Analysts study the P-47 to understand how robust design, engine performance, and pilot survivability intersect. The aircraft remains an icon of American engineering, a machine whose very existence challenged the assumptions of the Luftwaffe. Lerche's reports, preserved in archives, allow historians to reconstruct the exact performance of the Thunderbolt and evaluate the human and technical factors that shaped aerial combat. Beyond technical data, there is a broader philosophical truth. The story of a single German pilot, tasked with flying a captured enemy fighter, illuminates the interplay of innovation, adaptation, and industrial capacity in wartime. It shows how even a brilliant air force can be confronted with an adversary whose resources and engineering vision are so overwhelming that skill alone cannot prevail. As the Thunderbolts continued to sweep across Europe, supporting bombing raids, escorting vulnerable formations, and engaging Luftwaffe fighters in the skies over France, Belgium, and Germany, the lessons Lerche learned became clear. Victory in the air was no longer a matter of individual skill or tactical brilliance alone. It was a matter of design, resilience, and the ability to sustain relentless pressure. In the quiet corners of history, Hans Werner Lerche's flights over Rechlin stand as a testament to the encounter between two worlds. The carefully crafted precision of German engineering and the industrially powered might of the United States. One pilot, one captured aircraft, and countless hours of careful observation revealed truths that shaped not only the conduct of the air war, but also our understanding of how technology and strategy intertwine in conflict.